So we shall see some of the characteristics or features of a linear demand curve, that is d dash. So on a linear demand curve, elasticity varies from 0 to infinity. So in this linear demand curve, elasticity varies from 0, which is at d dash point, to infinity, which is at point D. So let us see the different cases one by one. So now take the straight line, that is DD demand curve, D dash as given in figure 10. So if point R is lying on the middle of the DD dash, if point R is on the middle of the demand curve DD dash, the lower segment, that is RD dash, will be equal to RD, which means that at the middle point of the straight line demand curve, the price elasticity will be equal to 1, which means that RD dash will be equal to RD, or RD dash divided by RD will be equal to 1, which means unitary price elasticity. So at point R, which is the middle point of the demand curve DD dash, the lower segment and the upper segment will be equal to 1, which means RD dash divided by RD will be equal to 1. So we can conclude that price elasticity, which is equal to RD dash divided by RD, will be equal to 1, at the middle point of the straight line demand curve. So that is the first case. So let's look at the second case. Let us take the point S. So suppose a point S lies above the middle point of the straight line demand curve DD dash. So it is obvious that the distance SD dash is larger or greater than distance SD, and price elasticity, which is equal to SD dash divided by SD, will be more than 1. So here in this case, SD dash divided by SD is less than 1, because SD dash is greater than SD when we look at the length of the demand curve. So this is a case of where price elasticity is greater than 1. And it will be seen from this diagram that as we move from S towards D, you will see that the price elasticity will go on increasing as we move up, as we move further towards this point D, and price elasticity will be equal to infinity at point D. This is because price elasticity, which is equal to RD dash RD, that is lower segment divided by upper segment. And as we move towards this D, you will see that the lower segment will go on increasing, while the upper segment will keep on decreasing, will become smaller and smaller, the upper segment. In other words, if we move upward, it is obvious that the lower segment is becoming greater and greater, and the upper segment is becoming smaller and smaller. And at point D, it is price elasticity is equal to infinity. Therefore, as we move towards from D on the demand curve, the price elasticity will be increasing. And at point D, the lower segment will be equal to the whole DD dash. So at this point D, the upper segment will be equal to DD dash, and there is no upper segment. at point D, the lower segment will be equal to D dash, and there will be no upper segment. And the upper segment can be said is equal to 0. So you will see that at point D, at this point D, the price elasticity will be D dash divided by 0, which is equal to infinity. So that is the extreme case. And moving ahead, let us take another case where the point is at L, which is moving towards the lower segment of the demand curve D dash. So L lies below the middle point on the linear demand, as we see here. It is below the middle point. In this case, the lower segment, that is LD dash, which is equal to LD dash divided by LD, will be less than 1, because the lower segment, that is LD dash, is less than LD. So the elasticity, which is equal to LD dash divided by LD, is less than 1. So this is because whereas lower segment will become smaller and smaller when we move down or move towards D dash, and the upper limit or the upper segment will become greater and greater as we move downwards towards point D dash. So at point D dash, price elasticity will be 0, since at point D, the lower segment will be equal to 0 and the upper one to the whole D dash. Therefore, at point D, price elasticity is 0 as given in this figure. So price elasticity at point D dash is 0 divided by D dash equals to 0. So that is the two extreme case. And when the point lies below the middle point. So what we have seen in this diagram and explained is that on a linear demand curve, elasticity varies or changes from point 0 to infinity. So different points will give you different price elasticity. So this area is elasticity which is greater than 1. Here it is price elasticity equal to 1. And then here this area, price elasticity is less than 1. And at D dash point, elasticity equals to 0, and at point D, elasticity equals to infinity. So those are the different elasticity at different point on the linear demand curve.